Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking a look at what has become, I think, the biggest domestic financial scandal of the decade.
And that's not an exaggeration.
Not at all. We're talking about Minnesota, a state that for so long was, held up as this shining model for progressive social services. And today, it's the global epicenter of a domestic fraud investigation, so staggering that federal officials believe it could top $9 billion.
$9 billion. I mean, that number alone should just stop you cold.
Right.
Because we're not just looking at petty theft here or, a few opportunistic crimes. This really represents a complete systemic collapse of oversight at every level of government.
And the fallout is already, it's catastrophic.
It is. We've seen Governor Tim Walz resign from his re-election campaign, and maybe most critically for the state, a total freeze on federal funding for essential childcare programs. That's the real-world consequence right there, that lack of trust.
All right, so let's try to unpack this enormous file. Our source material details a perfect storm. We've got the initial $250 million theft from child nutrition.
Yeah.
We have the bizarre reality of something kind of fraud tourism, viral citizen investigations that just blew the doors off the whole thing, and now the government's desperate technological Hail Mary, the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE.
So our mission for this deep dive is to understand two things. First, how exactly a state's foundational safety net was co-opted, effectively turning public funds into, an APM.
And the second thing?
The second is to trace the profound political and technological shockwaves. We need to focus on how rapidly digital accountability can move compared to, slow, grinding bureaucratic oversight.
I really appreciate that focus on speed, because this story didn't begin with a viral video, did it? Where did these systemic roots actually trace back to?
They trace directly back to the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. The initial vector, the one that led to the first big bust, was a nonprofit called Feeding Our Future. Federal rules for how we feed hungry children were deliberately relaxed during the crisis.
Just to get food out faster, right?
Exactly, to ensure food could get out fast. But prosecutors allege this group saw those relaxed rules as a perfect opportunity to set up a massive shell game.
How did they even manage to execute that on a $250 million scale?
They did it by submitting invoices for basically ghost children and ghost sites.
Ghost children?
Yeah. They created thousands of names of kids who either didn't exist or who just weren't being served. The documents highlight one particularly brazen example where a single site was claiming to feed thousands of kids daily.
Thousands daily.
And in reality, investigators found it was actually just a small storefront.
A small storefront. The sheer audacity of that is just, it's hard to process. And this is where the systemic failure really comes into focus, right? The sources show the state actually tried to stop the payments.
They did. But then they immediately hit the brakes.
Why? Why would they do that?
That moment of hesitation was fatal. When the state first tried to shut off the payment flow, the group turned around and sued the officials.
On what grounds?
Alleging racial discrimination. And the state auditor's investigation later found that officials pulled back because they were afraid of the threat of legal consequences and negative media.
So wait, the fear of a PR disaster or a costly lawsuit was a bigger motivator than stopping the actual provable theft of hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars.
That's the bureaucratic catch-22, isn't it?
It's the ultimate catch-22.
And it proved financially devastating. They kept the money flowing while they investigated the bias claims, which just meant the theft continued completely unabated.
So by the time the FBI finally got involved...
By the time the FBI took the case over, $250 million was gone, which, as you said, they quickly labeled the tip of the iceberg.
The tip of a $9 billion iceberg, apparently.
Yeah.
And that slow, painful legal process, that's what brings us to the digital explosion.
Exactly. Because while the lawyers were moving at a snail's pace, the public conversation shifted entirely in late 2025.
And this is where it turns from a local legal case into a digital firestorm.
Yes. The catalyst was a YouTuber named Nick Shirley. He traveled to Minneapolis, did his own 43-minute investigation, and just started filming the actual addresses of these daycare centers that were supposedly getting millions in federal funds.
And what did he find?
Empty buildings,
Oh.
locked doors, no kids, no teachers, just undeniable visual proof that money was being sent to ghost operations.
Wow.
And the virality of that discovery is crucial to understanding modern accountability. I mean, how do we quantify that exact moment when a video crosses the threshold from, interesting local story to a genuine political mandate?
It's all about amplification and reach, I'd imagine.
Correct. The sources mentioned the video was amplified instantly by major figures, including Elon Musk and Vice President J.D. Vance. Shirley's video hit over 131 million views on X.
131 million.
Think about that reach. It completely surpassed the combined viewership of the nightly news programs. It's just impossible for state leaders to look away from that.
That is the definition of viral accountability. It's that instant, irrefutable visual evidence that creates a mandate for action, and it completely bypasses those slow government mechanisms we just talked about.
Exactly. What's fascinating here, though, is the necessary nuance.
Okay.
While Shirley's visual power created the political mandate, traditional media, like CBS, did their own follow-up checks. And they found that some of the centers Shirley filmed were active.
So they weren't all empty.
Not all of them, no. But they had significant safety citations. So the story was complicated, but that initial visual evidence of just profound negligence was too powerful to ignore. The state couldn't maintain the status quo.
It certainly grabbed the attention of the Treasury Department. So let's talk about the true scale of this systemic collapse. I mean, $250 million is bad enough, but what makes up this projected $9 billion investigation?
Well, if we look at the source data on the program breakdowns, it's genuinely disturbing. The $250 million from Feeding Our Future was just the start.
Right.
But then you have the Housing Stabilization Program. That's tied to over $100 million in fraud, and they had to shut it down entirely. 13 people charged so far there.
And that Housing Stabilization Program is like a textbook example of systemic failure, isn't it? It was originally budgeted for, what, $2.6 million a year?
$2.6 million. And it ballooned by a factor of 40 to over 100 million.
How does that even happen?
The reason is incredibly simple. Low barriers to entry and almost non-existent record keeping. The system was, it was essentially designed to be scammed. It was an open digital door.
And the most shocking detail from the sources for me was this concept of fraud tourism.
Fraud tourism. Tell us about that.
Yes. Investigators found evidence of people traveling from as far away as Pennsylvania, specifically to sign up for and claim funds from these easily scammed Minnesota programs.
No way.
The word had spread in fraudulent circles that the verification process was just ridiculously weak. The state wasn't just losing money. It was actively inviting fraud from across the country.
Unbelievable. So what does this all mean for fixing the system? It feels like this is where the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, steps in.
Right. Trying to solve a human failure with a technological answer.
Exactly. And DOGE's influence is now reshaping state operations. They realized human auditors moving at that bureaucratic pace couldn't possibly catch this volume of fraud. So they're relying heavily on what they call agentic AI tools for cognitive oversight.
Okay, we hear about generative AI all the time, creating text, images. What is cognitive oversight AI actually doing to stop a scammer?
It's basically an autonomous, proactive detective. So generative AI creates, but agentic AI acts and connects. Cognitive oversight means the system is programmed to look for anomalies and patterns by cross-referencing vast, seemingly unrelated data sets. It doesn't need a human to prompt it.
So it's an automated watchdog?
A very smart one, yes.
Yeah. Can you give me a real-world analogy of that? Based on the source material, how specific can it get?
Think about the level of detail a human auditor might miss. The AI flags instantly if a daycare center claims to serve 500 kids a day, but U.S. Census data says only 50 kids even live in that zip code.
Okay, that's an obvious connection.
That's the obvious one. But agentic AI goes deeper. It connects that claim to the electrical grid data, the water usage records, the center's trash collection schedule. Does a center serving 500 people use the same amount of electricity as an empty storefront?
Of course not.
Right. The technology correlates all these disparate data points and spots the fundamental obvious lie that, paper-pushing bureaucrats missed for years.
That makes perfect sense for catching fraud, but hold on, isn't that a massive invasion of privacy? Or are we just trading one systemic problem, massive fraud, for another one, which is this total invisible surveillance state on honest businesses?
That is the essential friction point here. And it's a huge question. While it's necessary to stop the bleed, deploying this kind of technology naturally raises significant questions about civil liberties and data privacy.
Which we have to hold in tension.
Exactly. But for the government right now, the crisis is immediate. The priority is to stop the fraud first.
And this is where the story gets deeply sensitive and political. Let's address the social and ethnic fallout. We know that most of the defendants in that initial Feeding Our Future case are members of the Somali American community.
This is where the story really shifts from just a financial investigation to a political powder keg. President Trump used this information, and he quickly labeled the community garbage and a hub of money laundering.
And that kind of toxic political narrative led directly to a massive and highly controversial policy move.
A drastic, immediate step. The termination of temporary protected status, TPS, for Somali migrants in Minnesota.
When was this?
Early 2026. This policy decision affected thousands of people who were not involved in any crime whatsoever. It essentially turned a financial investigation into a form of collective political and social punishment.
And Governor Walz, who was already struggling with the fact that his administration missed this colossal theft, was caught right in the middle of this firestorm.
He was in an impossible position. He publicly fought the president's claims, calling them vile, racist lies, but at the same time, he had to admit his own administration was profoundly incompetent.
He had to defend the community while his own financial controls had totally failed the state.
It was an incredibly brutal position that, in the end, cost him his political future.
And as if that tension wasn't enough, we then had the TikTok war that successfully shifted the public conversation away from the actual missing money.
This is a fascinating microcosm of digital warfare and distraction. After Musk amplified those initial fraud videos to 131 million people, several Somali TikTokers began pushing back.
Pushing back against the narrative.
Right. And one influencer allegedly made a perceived death threat against Musk. Musk responded in kind, and it just polarized the entire public discourse. Suddenly, the focus wasn't on, where's the $9 billion?
It was on whose side are you on in this digital spat?
Exactly. A total distraction.
So let's bring the focus back to the money trail. We have $9 billion estimated missing or under investigation. Where did that staggering amount of cash actually go?
The Treasury Department is following the wire transfers. We know millions were wired out of the country, specifically to China and Kenya.
Okay.
And there were initial fears and some very strong political claims in the administration that the money was being funneled to terrorism, specifically to Al-Shabaab.
Is there any concrete direct proof of that link?
Well, this is key. Federal investigators clarified to CBS News that there is no direct evidence of money being funneled to terrorism. Yet, they stressed that most of the money, in fact, was spent on what investigators are calling lifestyle fraud.
Which means they didn't buy bombs, they bought villas.
Precisely. Luxury real estate, expensive cars, private high-end travel. Just pure, unadulterated greed disguised as government program utilization.
Let's end on what operational changes this crisis is forcing at the federal level. It seems like this DOGE effect is spreading way beyond Minnesota.
It absolutely is. This scandal has created a profound trust deficit. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, is now adapting its policies nationally.
How so?
They are now requiring photo evidence and real-time attendance tracking before sending money to states for Medicaid-supported daycares.
So this is the DOGE effect in action. It's a trust but verify model, but with a massive unprecedented emphasis on the verify part.
Right, demanding receipts, justifications, real-time data streams. It's radical transparency implemented by technology.
And there's a tragedy that comes with this fix, isn't there?
There is. While this level of verification is absolutely necessary to prevent future fraud, it will inevitably make it much harder for legitimate small businesses and honest nonprofits to get necessary funding quickly.
The system is protecting itself by raising the administrative barrier.
That's right. The problem wasn't the programs themselves. It was the unqualified middlemen, the phony nonprofits, and the so-called behavioral technicians that allowed the fraud to flourish.
So for any government official watching this collapse, what is the ultimate lesson in bureaucratic self-preservation in the modern age?
The lesson is that slow bureaucracy is obsolete. Technology, specifically agentic AI and viral journalism, has lowered the event horizon for government failure.
The event horizon.
If you are operating slowly, hiding inefficiency, or maintaining opaque processes, you will be exposed instantly. If a YouTuber can find an empty daycare just by driving by, your internal auditors have no excuse for not knowing it was empty years ago.
So transparency is no longer a virtue.
It is a necessity for survival.
What an unbelievable, stunning case study in how one viral video can topple a political career and completely change federal funding policy overnight.
It really is.
The speed of the social and digital world has finally collided with the ancient systems of government.
It just shows that the safety net only works if the integrity of the people holding that net is absolute. When that net becomes a web designed only for catching cash, the entire system falls apart. And the people who need help most are always the ones who suffer the most.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Given that technology and citizen journalism are forcing this level of transparency, what systems in your own local government, from building permits to school funding, might be hiding inefficiency or waste that only AI or a camera crew could expose? Think about that vulnerability the next time you see a massive budget line.
Food for thought, indeed.
We've included the full CBS report and the most recent conviction statistics in our show notes so you can follow the case as it unfolds. Stay vigilant, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.